Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of GUcast. This is Declan Murphy, urologist, not speaking from my usual studio in Melbourne this evening, but I'm speaking to you from London, my old stomping ground, where I trained as a urologist and spent some time as a consultant urologist. And I'm back in London for a couple of weeks as part of my sabbatical. I've just started a sabbatical, which perhaps we'll come back to in a future episode, focusing on nuclear medicine and prostate cancer. So yes, as a mid-career urologist specializing in prostate cancer, I've seen the light, and I'm going to turn myself into a nuclear medicine physician in some shape or form. Or so it says on the top of my sabbatical anyway. So I'm kicking off my sabbatical here in London this week, and rather than not be in the studio with Renu, I've decided to do a podcast from here. But I am going to say hello to my fabulous co-host, Renu Eapen, who's back in Melbourne. Hello, Renu. Good morning to you.
Hello, Declan. I turn up to work one day, you've packed your podcaster and you've just gone off. It's bizarre.
I know. And so any of you watching on YouTube, yes, here I am in a hotel room in London, but I did bring my favorite Rode podcasting studio with me because it's small. And I tracked down a few people today, Renu, who might come and do a podcast, old friends of the podcast who said, yeah, bring your podcaster into guys on Monday. We'll do a podcast and so on. So I have it here on tour. Never leave home without your podcasting studio. It's my new mantra post-COVID.
That's fantastic. But, one thing that hasn't changed for me are the early starts. So thank you for that, Declan.
Yes, Saturday. I'm very sorry. Saturday morning in Melbourne. It's
this one is worth getting up for. And, I'm glad we're doing this.
Well, yes, because you and I are 20,000 kilometers apart. It's 7 a.m. on Saturday morning in Melbourne. It's 8 p.m. here in London. But meeting in the middle, we have two fantastic international guests who've joined us on the podcast to talk about a really important subject, a little bit off the topic of GU oncology that we normally focus on, but really important nonetheless. And Renu, I'll hand over to you and you can introduce or welcome our fantastic guests.
Yeah, so it's just been with shock and horror that we've watched the crisis in Ukraine unfolding over the past few weeks. And, it's the stuff of nightmares, and you appreciate how terrible it is. But not many people in the world can really, truly understand the level of despair that these people are facing, that the refugees in Ukraine who are trying to escape are facing. But there are two people in the world that truly understand this. And those are our guests today. Dr. Laura Bukavina from Fox Chase Cancer Centre and Dr. Alberto Castro, both of us who have joined here today. And rather than me trying to introduce them, I thought I might hand over to them and let them give us a little bit of background about themselves and what sort of led to their decision to go to the Ukraine-Polish border and help these people in crisis. Laura, maybe I'll hand over to you first. Welcome to the podcast, by the way. It's great to see both of you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, and thank you for dedicating this time to be a little bit off topic to discuss sort of our efforts and everyone else's efforts worldwide at helping the Ukrainian crisis currently. So my name is Laura Bukavina. I am a GU Urologic Oncology Fellow at Fox Chase Cancer Centre, having trained at Case Western with Dr. Ponsky, who I know at least Declan is fairly aware with. And I am Ukrainian. I was born in Ukraine, immigrated at the age of 10, and still have family in Ukraine, in Western Ukraine. Aside from the ties due to my birth, I just couldn't kind of bear the trauma that a lot of the mothers and the children were going through with this Ukrainian crisis. And the images were just, as you said, just terrible. Couldn't sleep, couldn't think of anything else. So I didn't think that the efforts in terms of just doing something from United States were enough to help for me. So decided to fly in to Poland, the Ukrainian border, 2 days after the invasion happened, to help as much as I can. And when I flew in, there was no idea of what I was going to do, even though I do work with a non-for-profit organization. And even though I am a physician, I flew in with all sorts of things that I could help with. So I didn't come in necessarily to help on the medical spectrum. I came in to help in any way I can, whether it's paperwork or translating or cleaning or cooking, anything that I could help to make this a little bit better. And I'll sort of transition to introducing Alberto, because I think I kind of dragged him into it, willingly or unwillingly, depending on how he feels about it. But 3 days after I was there, I felt really fairly overwhelmed with the medical support and the sheer number of people that needed help. So I called in Alberto's help, him having a pretty wide experience in dealing with global disasters, and being a colleague at Fox Chase, and he flew in the same night as I asked him, and we were there for about 2 weeks, chugging along and helping the refugees as much as we can.
Yeah, sure. Alberto, welcome.
Well, thank you so much. I'll introduce myself rather quickly. So I actually graduated from medical school about a year ago in 2021, and decided to do a research here at Fox Chase, which is how I actually met Laura. And I will be a resident in training at Temple this upcoming year in urology as well. And then, going into what kind of spurred my decision to go is not only Laura asked, but before that, I had reached out to the Red Cross, the International Federation of the Red Cross, to be specific. I also reached out to the Ukrainian Health Ministry and said, hey, I'm here in the US. I'm willing to do whatever you guys need me to do, not just medicine, but also, cook. I can't translate. I don't speak the language, but I'm willing to do anything else, clean, cook, whatever you need me to do for the people migrating over. And I basically had no expectations, but I spoke to Laura, and knowing that she needed help, I was willing to go and once again do anything that was needed. Went over without any expectations, and yeah, spent about 2 weeks there.
And Matt, both of you have now returned back home, and you've probably taken the first hot shower you've had in weeks, and maybe eaten a proper meal. And I must say, when Declan and I just met you on Zoom right now, the first thing both of you said is that you wish you were back there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it almost feels guilty for us to be sitting here and in a nice, cozy environment, nice and clean, having a nice breakfast. And then all I could think of is the images of people coming in at night in the cold. It's cold. It's -7 degrees. It's snowing. Little children, 2 weeks and up. Lots of kids. I mean, 50% of what you see are kids, just standing there for hours, days in this weather, crying. And here we are just sitting.
Laura, you've posted some amazing pictures and videos on social media, bringing that home to us, these pictures of people fleeing across the border whose lives were normal 3 weeks ago, living in houses, going to school, having sport at the weekends, having electricity, running water, having mum and dad at home. And you send these pictures, which I suppose give the rest of us some sort of snapshot into it. But and these social media has been a powerful way, I think, of communicating the reality of this terrible situation. But can you talk to us a little bit more about what you experienced on the ground? You're not somebody who is normally volunteered to put yourself in these sort of conflict situations. You're a busy doctor. You're a busy mum as well, I understand, and you took yourself off to the far side of the world, in the border, living in a tent, watching these people come across the border. Tell us a little bit more about that experience.
I mean, we have tons of stories to share, but I have 3 kids. I have 3 boys, two 7 and 12 years old, and seeing those pictures of kids my age, my boys, they look like my boys, 100% Ukrainian boys, sitting there in the cold. I quickly made the decision, with my family's support, to go over. My husband and my brother also came with me, and both of them are non-physicians, and they said, anything we can do. We'll work on supplies, we'll get trucks, we'll transfer people. And I can tell you, since I was there pretty much since the second day of the war, things have changed dramatically. And I'll show you pictures of how kind of things progressed. So what I can tell you, Declan, is that there is no government support from Poland in these refugee infrastructure. All of the 8 sites by Poland and Ukraine are managed by independent NGOs, and on some level, perhaps maybe a little bit of city funding. So the government of Poland does not have a centralized system in terms of their sort of declaration of emergency and establishing these centers. So all 8 centers across the border are set up independently, are vastly different. So the first thing that we did is we toured about 4 or 5 of them, and we looked at where is the need, where is sort of where's the highest level of people crossing, what do they need, and what's lacking, and how can we help? Because just putting yourself into one spot, not having, maybe there's another spot that needs you desperately, and the spot that you're in doesn't need you. So we toured about 4 or 5 of them, and we ended up staying at Medica, which is the sort of the busiest border. It's actually majority of the pictures you see in media are from that border site. Not only is because it's the busiest, but also it's just poorly organized and there's nothing there. And we saw that there's a need for medical care. There was only a nurse and 2 paramedics there, no doctor at all, for about 250,000 refugees coming through on a daily basis at that time, at the peak of the refugee crisis. And then additional that, there were only 2 buses servicing 250,000 refugees. So what they do is they take the buses and they transfer the refugees from the actual border to a place 15 kilometers away, which is where the camps are, the bed where they can register and they can be sort of set up with housing. The first 2 days, there were only 1 bus that was circulating for about 200,000 refugees. 1 bus every maybe 3 hours, 4 hours. In the middle of the night, there was no bus between 2 and 7 a.m. So between 2 and 7 a.m., people had to wait outside. And then the bus would eventually maybe potentially catch up in transferring people by around 6 o'clock in the evening. So you can imagine, and you've seen pictures of these people waiting in lines and lines and lines already on the Polish border. I'm not even talking about waiting for 3 days before the border, waiting additional day on the border already in Poland. With kids, there was no tents, there was no warming tents set up. They didn't anticipate a lot of these things to happen in the volume of people coming through. There were no tents, there was not enough food, there was no clothing, and then people were just having panic attacks. Yeah, people were having heart attacks, kids were sick, people were having fevers. There was no such thing as COVID masking anywhere. So everyone was coughing everywhere. And seeing that the first day, it was a nightmare.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and then
stories that I'm sure will change you forever. Alberto, is there anything that really sticks with you? I'm sure all of it does, but are there any things you can highlight to us?
Yeah, I just kind of reiterate what Laura said. It's the same things that I saw when I got there. We were doing the night shift, basically. So one would argue that it's rather the coldest time of the day, right? And you see just a sheer number of people, mainly being pregnant women, women with children, and elderly, just standing outside, freezing in these cold temperatures. It's snowing. The wind is howling everywhere just because there's nothing around you. It's just field in a border, right? And like she said, there weren't any tents. There was no heating elements. So you see people just out there. 3 days in, we saw a kid in just a fleece, like my fleece, and nothing else. He was just wearing this and like jogging pants in this temperature. So we quickly gathered up different clothing pieces and started handing it to him. I even said to Laura, I was like, give him my jacket. I don't need it. I can go back to the ES and get another one. I'm in a tent at the moment. But the things that that shocked me the most was the amount of time that people had to wait. Like she said, sometimes 4 days in the border, then come and have to wait more hours. And then you listen to the stories in my broken translating skills with my phone. You hear people saying, I've walked 40 hours. I've been standing for 20 hours. And these are people who are 87, 89 years old, or women with 4 kids, not taking care of themselves because they've forgotten everything. They imagine walking all this time and you only have enough hands for the clothing for the kids and nothing for you. So like the things that we saw was people forgetting their medications, their insulin, taking care of themselves, and just panic attacks all over the place, but understandably so. And also the little kids talking about, I hate sirens. Like what 6-year-old says, I hate sirens? We all know what sirens mean. It means bombs, right? But like what kid at 6 says those things? right?
Right.
And those are the things that impact me the most.
And people, I think, don't realize, they don't think, why are they just coming with no supplies, right? You see pictures of people just carrying a little bag, and people don't realize that the reason why they're carrying a little bag is because they're walking for 3 days and they couldn't walk with their bags anymore. It's not like you're in a nice airport with nice even ground. You're not going to be dragging your bag with you over the rocky roads with 3 kids. At some point, you're going to say, I can't do this anymore. I have to carry my kids over carrying my suitcase. So they would just drop and get a little like paper bag, like a grocery bag size of their belongings. And that's all they have. So they've had, they were well supported. They had nice housing, they had cars, they had everything. And this is all they have with 3 kids coming through. They have no husband. They don't have a dad. Their dads and their husbands are fighting in Ukraine. They don't know if they're ever going to see them again. This is all you have from your life. And you have 3 kids depending on you. And you're standing in the cold. And just last week, you were sitting at home in your slippers with having a wonderful life. So it's just such a drastic change for people, and people don't realize what's going to happen in a week or 2 from now, because it's all going to hit them very, very hard.
That's one of the saddest parts, isn't it? Even if you walk the 40 hours and wait the 10 hours and cross the border, the nightmare continues.
Right. You have no certainty, especially for people who don't have family in Europe or overseas. What is your next plan? You're going to end up in Germany or France or Poland. And what's next? Your schools, your kids, your work, where are you going to live? You don't know the language. What's your plan B? And people will figure it out. As the world has figured out, Ukraine, whether it's men or women, have big balls, right? We'll figure it out, and we can do it. But I don't necessarily, why did this have to happen? Why is the world letting this happen?
It's just terrible. And we're day 16. I suppose we should remind ourselves on a podcast of where and when we are, because people tend to listen to these things at different times. But day 16 is very early. I think, Laura, you got out there 2 days after the thing happened. So you must have had a dramatic sense of an evolving situation where they'd just about come over the border. A lot of people, me included, couldn't believe this was happening. I was convinced he was going to drive all these tanks up to the border and then turn around and go home. I literally, while you were packing up and going to Poland, I was literally still shaking my head as a European going, I can't believe he's actually driven over the border. So you spent 14 of the last 16 days there. We're only day 16 now. And you must have had that same sense of, I can't believe they're launching missile strikes on apartment buildings, on hospitals. And you tweeted out a picture a couple of days ago after we were all shocked at seeing a maternity hospital bombed. And there's a poor pregnant lady semi-naked on a stretcher being wheeled out of a maternity hospital. So day 16 in, and you get the sense that it's probably only getting going. So have you any sense of the direction it's going and what we might be looking at day 32, a couple of weeks from now?
Yeah, I am. So a lot of the Eastern, so if you remember the conflict back in 2014, initial conflict with the sort of the Eastern regions of Ukraine, with the Donbass and Kharkiv, where a lot of people actually initially from the East migrated to central Ukraine. So they were initially refugees back from 2014. So all of the people who have now migrated from central Ukraine to Western Ukraine, because we only have about 2.5 million of 44 million total population that has crossed the borders. So there's still about 42 million people that are in Western Ukraine, right? So consider half of those are men that are ineligible to cross. There's still about 20 million children and women that potentially have the ability to cross, and a lot of them are in western parts of Ukraine. Now, as Alberto has mentioned, is that you have seen more rockets hit today in the Western Ukraine. People feel, okay, Western Ukraine, it's close to Poland, it's safer, it's going to be fine. He's only interested in Eastern Ukraine. And we all said he's only interested to come through the border for those 2 cities. Next, we said he's not going to attack Kyiv. Next, we said he's not going to go as far as attack civilians. Next, we said he's not going to attack maternity hospitals and children's hospitals. And he clearly has surpassed all of our worst, terrible nightmares. So what's next? Western Ukraine is next. So what's going to happen to the people who are currently being housed in Western Ukraine? They're all going to flood Europe. We're not set up. Poland is not set up. Hungary is not set up. Romania is not set up to handle this amount of refugees.
Wow, it really kind of sends chills down your spine to think about it.
It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, it's no words, right? It's just incredible.
So anyway, you did speak a moment ago, just to cheer ourselves up a bit. One of the things I've enjoyed reading about the last 2 weeks, one of the few things is the fortitude, the resilience, the bravery, the good character, the humor of the Ukrainian people. I've known very few Ukrainians myself over the years, Laura, but one of our close friends in Melbourne, one of our colleagues, Nathan Larenchuk, who works with us at Peter Mac and Royal Melbourne, is a very proud Ukrainian. We tweeted out our support for Nathan when we went and marched in Melbourne a couple of weeks ago. His dad fled Ukraine when he was 10 years old and started a new future for his family. And as we spoke to his dad actually last week, and he told us those stories, you suddenly get transported to the world of today, to those families you just described coming across, leaving menfolk behind. Hopefully, of course, they'll be reunited at some stage, hopefully in a sovereign Ukraine. But listening to Nathan and his father speaking about him fleeing Ukraine after the Second World War was a stark reminder of the consequences, I suppose, of everything you've just described, this ongoing spill, this evacuation of Ukrainians. But we have all been extraordinarily struck by the resilience and actually the fantastic leadership we've seen from President Zelensky, who I think surpassed all expectations. He's turned out to be a fantastic leader. And all of us want to embrace the Ukrainians, and we all want to support the sovereign aspirations of getting that country back together. Have you sensed that yourself as a proud Ukrainian who left Ukraine 10 years old? Have you sensed yourself the overwhelming emotion that the rest of the world is showing towards you and fellow Ukrainians as we watch this terrible situation develop?
100%. There's just such overwhelming support from everywhere, from not only from the United States and the rest of Europe, but from everywhere. Every piece of this continent is supporting, aside from maybe a few countries that are supporting Russia, but they're just supporting not only in terms of funds and housing refugees, but also in terms of just supporting the democracy and making sure that the Ukrainians are welcome in their countries. And you go from a small local level. I think, everyone at Fox Chase has been extremely supportive of us. There's no such thing in terms of when you have to come back. The nurses at Fox Chase, at Case Western, in Cleveland and in Philadelphia have just put independently funded, have been sort of collecting funds for refugee support, have been sending supplies, have been getting medication, and that's all independent while we're overseas in Poland. And I've been getting messages after messages after messages. How can I help? Whether it's for physician or nurses, how can I donate? Where can I send this? I mean, the amount of support is surreal.
And we'll put the links up here, of course. We've supported your Gofundme page. I understand that's the best way to do things, is just literally try and put some cash towards it. I've loved reading about these stories of people booking Airbnbs. So I booked myself an Airbnb this weekend as I'm sitting here in London. in some ridiculously overpriced hotel room. I've also booked an Airbnb in Kiev, and I got this lovely message back from the people who own it. So I think that's what we loved about your social media campaign, watching yourself and Alberto post these pictures. But you did give us a way in which we could try and support that. So can you tell us a little bit more about that, the practical things that we can do to help? I presume still supporting various direct donation opportunities like GoFundMe is still the right thing to do. It makes sure that the money is being spent on things that people need absolutely the most as they come across the border. And we will push out those links, but please share them with us.
Yeah, so GoFundMe is the most direct and easier way for people to donate. They can certainly just donate the money, and what we do is we take that money, we buy medication, we buy supplies for kids and women, and we ship it directly to the warehouse that we have in Poland. So there's no sort of difficulties in transaction. We take pictures of everything that leaves United States where we purchase it. We take pictures when it arrives into a warehouse in Poland. Then we take pictures as we transition from a hospital, or it's going to the border at the Poland border, or it's going directly to hospitals. And we have green corridors set up, which means everything kind of goes in and out very quickly. And we have contacts that we trust, which we have verified, because at the time of war, there's people who try to sort of take advantage of the war. And we have contacts set up in hospitals where we know things are handed off to the appropriate people. And part of why we traveled, and Alberto was there to help us, is to make sure we set up those contacts and make sure we set up knowing the right people, that we're sending this to the right place and not just sending it somewhere where we don't know what happens to those supplies.
Incredible. And we'll make those links well known so that people can continue to support you, because you started such incredible humanitarian efforts. And, despite the shipment of so much medical supplies and donations, these are really only a drop in the ocean as the situation continues to evolve. And I think ongoing support is definitely needed. So we'll definitely get that out there. You guys have been snapping pictures everywhere, and some of your tweets are incredible. And like everyone knows, a picture tells 1,000 words, right? And some of the things that in my mind that I'll never forget are, the picture of all those little kids in that bomb shelter having like a kindergarten almost. That was incredible. And the picture of a mum carrying a 2-week-old with 2 additional small children by her side, and the picture that Declan mentioned of the pregnant woman being airlifted off this completely bombed maternity hospital. These are incredible things that will stay with me, but must have really changed your lives forever.
And then my favorite time of the night was when Alberto was playing kindergarten and feeding breakfast to the kids. So it gets cold and there's no warming tents. So our medical tent becomes a daycare center. So we put as many kids as possible into our medical tent. And then Alberto's really great with kids, and he teaches them English, and he gives them breakfast sandwiches. And then we have lots of pictures of that. And kids are so resilient. Even though they realize sort of what's happening, they're just so resilient, and you can you see that hope in their eyes, and they really are the future, and we have to make sure that we take care of them.
For sure.
And you've given some hope to them in very dark times.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing about that time period when it's cold and those things, because despite it being a war, like Laura said, kids are resilient, but also the elderly who have already gone through this in one way or another in 2014, 2015, and maybe in the past as well. Something that impacts me is when we had we posted a picture on this. It was the elderly couple who were sitting there wrapped up in blankets. And I don't speak Ukrainian, like I said, and sometimes Laura's standing outside doing, directing or doing some type of medical work. So I go in there and talk to them in my just hand motions. And I knew that the gentleman wanted a chocolate, because I kept on asking, do you want chai? Do you want this? And the wife would say no, but he would kind of look at me like, yeah. So I would kind of play around, sort of kind of tease them a little bit until they gave in to yeah, okay, I want chai, I want chocolate. And you can just see so much joy in that little moment, because they sort of I don't want to use the word they forget of what's going on, but they kind of put it to the side for a moment and taste chocolate, taste something happy, have something warm, and just have a moment of peace in this warm little tent.
Yeah, this couple was extraordinary. This couple, the gentleman had a stroke, so he had left deficit, so he wasn't able to walk. So he hopped across the border because there's no wheelchairs. So his wife, who's 89 years old, helped him hop across the border. And then we saw them hopping and we just couldn't let them go. We just put them in a tent for a couple of hours and apparently Alberto fed them chocolate the whole night.
I love that photo of the two of them there. They were a gorgeous couple. And that was a great tweet that you put out. So, another one that I loved, Laura, was on International Women's Day. You posted a picture of the Ukrainian army, the women in the army, which make up about 13%. And you said, they fight not because they hate what's in front of them, but because they love what's behind them. And then hopefully that will be the motto of all of us going forward.
And that's very true, not only for the women, but you also see a lot of people coming from all over internationally to support the military, right? They come because they know what they're fighting for. They're fighting for the democracy. So like I said, we see tons of Polish, Canadian, US Marines, Georgians, Belarusian coming through across the border to help the fight.
I suppose Alberto would be part of that because this guy's not Ukrainian. He's not like, you're clearly a Ukrainian, but yet young Alberto recently graduated from medical school, future urologist, never been to the Ukraine, I presume, Alberto, or even Poland, but off you went on the mission to help Laura. So, okay, I suppose we all feel helpless looking at it, but for you to join Laura on that very worthy campaign is a fantastic selfless gesture. But I think for other listeners out there listening to this story, and those of us especially who've watched you on your Twitter feed, and also I've seen you on the BBC and on CBS, and telling the stories definitely matters. But I think for our listeners who are very global on GUcast, listening to these stories, there are things we can all do to help. We might not all be the Laura Bukavinas or the Alberto Castros of the world who'll just get on a plane and go there. But if you can, please do. And you'll have understanding bosses like Alex Kudikov, who I want to ask you about in a moment. But if not, for the vast majority of the rest of us, please do go and support this as best you can. Gofundme, we'll put the links in the pages, or whatever other resources out there. But Laura, can I ask you about your boss? So you're a fellow, yes. So you're already trained urologist from Case Western, and you're spending a year, is it, or 2 years at Fox Chase under the tutelage of the great Dr. Alexander Kutikov, the chief.
Who's don't forget Dr. Uzo too.
Oh yeah, Dr. Uzo, Rob Uzo.
The boss of the bosses.
Yeah. Oh, he's still the boss. Every time I speak to Alex, he gives me the impression that he's the real boss, But I forgot. Rob Uzo, of course, is the big boss at Fox Chase. But Kutikov, who's a great fella. He's a friend of the podcast, but I've spent a lot of time with him over the years. We're sort of the same generation growing up in global urology. He's half Russian, half Ukrainian, I think, isn't he?
Yes. Yes. I believe his mom is Ukrainian and his dad is Russian.
Yeah. And I know he's very well connected to those communities. He's often regaled me because he's a great storyteller, telling stories of Ukraine, stories of Russians, all the sort of patients he has, very colourful. But I think that story is very typical, isn't it, of, half Ukrainian, half Russian, Belarusian. It's Europe, it's small, people mingle.
Right.
So you must see a lot of that. This is not just a straight line of you're a Russian who wants to invade Ukraine, or you're Ukrainian mounting a resistance. There's a whole mishmash of people in the middle who are torn with all of this, who feel very strong allegiances either way. And I think the sort of Kutikov, half Russian, half Ukrainian, lives in the US experience is not rare, is it?
No, it's not. Actually, half of my husband's family lives in Moscow, so it's not rare. You have pretty much everyone who has a family in Russia somewhere, and vice versa. They have family in Ukraine, and the same goes to Poland. Half of my family is in Poland. So, like you said, Europe is it's almost like states. People in America have family that's in other states. People in Europe have family that's in other countries, just because the borders are so close. So it's not a war of the people. It's the war of it's a political war, right? It's the people clearly don't want this, even with the way that the war is portrayed in the media in Russia. There's huge opposition to this war. There's people protesting on the streets with dire consequences. I mean, I have to tell you a story. One of our close friends here in Cleveland, actually, she's Russian, and her daughter was protesting in Moscow, and she was beaten so severely that she's day 3 in a coma currently, and she's 24 years old. So people don't want this war, and people are supporting of Ukrainians, and people are united against it.
Well, there you go. Look, it's been fantastic to listen to you tell your personal stories, and I'm sure, although you've landed back in the US, both of you, your hearts are still very much on the border. It's what you'll be seeing and thinking and getting messages about, and we love listening to you and telling your story, and hopefully that will help the rest of the world out there, help do our own gesture, see what we can do to help the people of Ukraine. And all we can do is pray and hope that the people, as you say, the political people who actually control this, it's not the people on the ground, will actually find a way to have a resolution sooner rather than later. Renu.
Incredible stories. And I think it'll be challenging for the both of you to sort of fit back into normal life again. I think that will take a while, but thank you for coming on and sharing your stories. I think it helps us to see the situation for what it really is.
Thank you for having us. Thank you, Declan. Thank you, Renu. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough for us to go back. I'm already thinking of how I can go back. So we'll have to talk to Alex about that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Thank you so much for having both of us, letting us tell the story, and also making everyone aware of what's going on as well and how they can help. And like Laura said, I can't wait to go back if I can. And I'm already looking for things to bring. I'm looking for equipment, searching for tents, heating elements. I'm like, okay, what can we do here in the US and get ready and go back? But that might be a conversation for later.
Start collecting your chocolate now, Alberto.
Yeah. Well, look,
I already started.
Keep it up. I'm going to get on and contribute more to your GoFundMe straight away. We'll put the links up, and wish you all the best. And I hope you do both get back there, but hopefully it'll all be on the wind up and you can enjoy better times there. Thanks so much to Laura Bukavina and Alberto Castro for joining us on GUcast today. We also stand with Ukraine. We'll put the links in the podcast. Please do support the poor people of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.